My husband of 20 years called me useless in open court. The word did not just sting. It was meant to erase me, to reduce a lifetime of quiet sacrifice into nothing more than a burden he had to carry. For one breath, I felt the world shatter. But he had no idea. He was talking to a ghost, a woman he never really knew. And that ghost was about to haunt him in front of the entire world. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from as this story unfolds. And if you are ready for a story about quiet strength and loud justice, make sure you subscribe to the channel. The university archives smelled of old paper and linseed oil, a scent of patient history that always calmed my soul. It was my sanctuary, a place where silence was not empty, but full of stories waiting to be understood. My fingers, steady and sure, traced the delicate contour lines of a Petit-era military map of the Ardennes forest. The paper was fragile, brittle with age, and it demanded respect. My job was to preserve it, to reinforce its weaknesses, so that the truth it held would not be lost to time. It was meticulous work, requiring focus and a gentle hand. It was everything my life outside these walls was not. The heavy oak door creaked open, and the quiet harmony of the room was immediately broken. I did not need to look up. I knew the sound of his expensive Italian shoes on the polished floor. I knew the scent of his cologne, a sharp, aggressive fragrance that always felt like an invasion in my quiet world. Marcus was a weather system of ego and expensive fabrics, and he had just blown into my haven. His voice, too loud for the hallowed quiet, boomed with false affection. Still playing with dusty old paper scraps, honey, I did not flinch. Years with him had taught me a kind of stillness, a fortress built brick by silent brick inside my own mind. I carefully placed a weighted snake of soft leather along a crease in the map before I finally looked up at him. My smile was a practiced, placid thing I had worn for 2 decades. It was a mask. "Hello, Marcus. I had a good day." He walked closer, his shadow falling over the intricate details of the Battle of the Bulge. He peered down, not with interest, but with the detached curiosity of a man looking at a child's strange hobby. He gestured vaguely at my work with a flick of his wrist, the glint from his ridiculously expensive watch catching the light. "I still do not get why you waste your time with this stuff. It is all dead and gone. What is the point?" The point, I thought, is that if you don't understand the strategy of the past, you are doomed to lose the battles of the future. But I did not say that. Instead, I gave him the simple, digestible answer he could understand. It is important to the history department. He snorted a sound of pure dismissal. "Right. Well, try not to bring the smell of dust home with you. I am closing a big real estate deal tomorrow, and I am taking the team out to celebrate tonight. I will be home late." He did not ask if I wanted to join. He never did. I just nodded, turning my attention back to the map. He saw my dismissal for what it was, a quiet wall he could not breach, and it annoyed him. His final words were laced with the familiar edge of contempt he saved just for me. "At least try to look busy. Make my tax write-off for the university donation worth something." He turned and left. The heavy door clicked shut, and the silence he had shattered slowly began to stitch itself back together. But it was different now. It was colder. I looked down at the map at the faded lines, marking troop movements and strategic positions. He called my life's passion a waste of time. He saw my mind as a dusty, useless archive. He had no idea what kind of information a place like this could hold, or what a quiet archivist was capable of when the foundations of her own history were threatened. That evening, our house buzzed with a manufactured energy that always set my teeth on edge. It was the kind of gathering Marcus loved, a performance piece designed to showcase his success. The air was thick with the scent of expensive wine and even more expensive perfume. Men in tailored suits talked loudly about stock portfolios and golf handicaps, while their wives, adorned in glittering jewelry, discussed vacation homes and private schools. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, a polite smile fixed on my face, a glass of water my only shield. I had learned long ago that my role at these events was to be a silent, agreeable accessory, to nod, to smile, and to never, ever offer an opinion that might contradict or overshadow my husband. My quiet world of historical documents and strategic analysis had no place here. Here, value was measured in dollars and decibels, and I was fluent in neither. I was standing near the large bay window, watching the city lights twinkle below, when I heard Marcus's booming laugh. He was holding court by the fireplace, a glass of dark liquor swirling in his hand. He was telling a story about a recent acquisition, a complex deal involving zoning variances and offshore investors. He made it sound like he had single-handedly conquered a small country. I could see the admiration in the eyes of the younger associates from his firm. They hung on his every word. Then David, a senior partner I had known for years, turned to me. His wife, Patricia, smiled kindly. "It must be fascinating," she said, "being married to a man with such a brilliant financial mind." Before I could form a response, Marcus's voice cut across the conversation. He had an uncanny ability to hear his own name from across a crowded room. "Oh, Eleanor keeps herself busy," he said, his tone dripping with condescending affection. "Tell them what you do, honey." All eyes turned to me. The familiar heat of humiliation crept up my neck. This was his favorite game, his little public performance of putting me in my place. I kept my voice even, my gaze steady. "I work at the university archives. I specialize in the preservation of historical military documents." Patricia's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "How fascinating! That must require incredible attention to detail." Marcus laughed again, a short, sharp bark that cut her off. "She is basically a professional organizer," he clarified for the group, as if I were a child who had used the wrong word. "She makes sure the history professors do not lose their old papers. It is a sweet little hobby." He winked at me, a gesture that was supposed to look like affection, but felt like a pat on the head to a simple-minded pet. The conversation moved on, leaving me standing in the wake of his casual dismissal. No one noticed the slight tremor in my hand. No one saw the way I gripped my glass of water until my knuckles turned white. They only saw what Marcus wanted them to see: the quiet, unremarkable wife of a brilliant man. They saw a woman who organized history, never thinking for a moment that she might be capable of making it. Standing there invisible in plain sight, I felt the first cold whisper of a coming storm. He had just drawn a battle line, and he had no idea I was the one who wrote the maps. The memory of the uniform of the woman I used to be lingered with me for days. It was a quiet hum beneath the surface of my daily routines, a secret strength I carried into the archives. I felt a subtle shift in my own posture, a renewed focus in my work. The decision had been made not in a moment of anger, but in the cold, clear logic of the midnight hours. I would not be erased. I would simply wait for the right moment to act. I didn't have to wait long. It happened on a Tuesday morning. The sky was a flat, indifferent gray. I was in the kitchen, carefully measuring coffee grounds into the filter, the small, precise movements of familiar comfort. Marcus had been uncharacteristically quiet since the dinner party, moving through the house with a tense, coiled energy. I knew that silence. It was the calm before a carefully orchestrated storm. He walked into the kitchen, already dressed in a sharp, dark suit that made him look more like a predator than a businessman. He did not say good morning. He did not ask for coffee. He simply walked to the marble island in the center of the room and tossed a thick manila envelope onto the counter. The sound was flat and final, like a gavel striking wood. I looked from the envelope to his face. His expression was a mixture of smug satisfaction and cold dismissal. There was no sadness in his eyes, no hint of regret, only the triumphant gleam of a man who believed he had already won. "Sign it," he said. His voice was devoid of all emotion. My hand stilled over the coffee maker. I did not need to ask what it was. I had been anticipating this move for months, running through the strategic possibilities in my mind as if it were a tactical exercise. But the clinical preparation did little to soften the blunt force of the moment itself. I picked up the envelope. My fingers were surprisingly steady as I pulled out the sheaf of papers. Divorce proceedings. The legal language was dense and suffocating, but the intent was brutally clear. I scanned the pages, my eyes moving with the practiced efficiency of an analyst reviewing intelligence reports. Asset division, property settlement, spousal support. Then I saw the clause, the one he had made sure his lawyers crafted with surgical cruelty. I read it once, then twice, letting the words sink in like poison. Based on the plaintiff's lack of any significant financial or intellectual contribution to the marital estate throughout the duration of the 20-year marriage. Lack of contribution. The phrase was designed to be a weapon, a final legal branding of the word he had used as a casual insult for years. Useless. He was not just trying to leave me. He was trying to nullify my existence, to codify my worthlessness into a court document, to officially declare my life's work, both the public and the secret parts of it, as meaningless. A strange calm washed over me. The initial shock, the flicker of pain receded, replaced by something cold and hard and clear. It was the feeling a commander gets when the enemy's intentions are no longer ambiguous, when the fog of war lifts and the battlefield is laid bare. He had made his move. It was aggressive, it was arrogant, and it was a fatal miscalculation. He thought he was handing me a death sentence. He had no idea. He had just given me my opening salvo. I looked up from the papers, my gaze meeting his, across the cold expanse of the marble island. My silence seemed to unnerve him. He had expected tears, perhaps pleading, or at the very least a satisfying eruption of futile anger. He had prepared himself for a scene, a drama in which he held all the power. My quiet composure was not part of his script, and it threw him off balance. "Well," he prompted, his voice sharp with impatience, "there is nothing to discuss. My lawyers have been very generous considering the circumstances." Generous. The word hung in the air, a monument to his astounding arrogance. He was stripping me of 20 years of my life, attempting to legally erase my contributions and calling it generosity. I carefully placed the documents back on the counter, aligning the edges with perfect precision, the same way I would align a map before a briefing. "I see," I said. My voice was low, steady, revealing nothing of the tactical analysis firing through my mind. My calm seemed to infuriate him further. He took a step closer, leaning his hands on the island invading my space. He lowered his voice into a menacing growl, the one he used when he wanted to make sure I understood my place. "Listen to me, Eleanor, and listen carefully. I have spent the last 2 decades building an empire while you were playing with your dusty papers. Everything you have, this house, the clothes on your back, it is all because of me. You are nothing without me. Do you understand that you are walking away from this with far more than you deserve?" I met his gaze without flinching. I saw the contempt in his eyes, the absolute certainty of his own superiority. He did not see me. He saw a liability. He was finally cutting loose a charity case he had grown tired of supporting. In his mind, the battle was already over. He had won before it had even begun. He straightened up, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive shirt, a gesture of finality. "My advice to you," he said, his voice returning to its normal, condescending tone, "is to sign the papers, take what I'm offering, and disappear quietly. Do not try to fight this. You do not have the resources. You do not have the intellect. And you certainly do not have the guts. You would be a fool to challenge me in court." He turned his back to me, then a final act of dismissal, and walked towards the door. He paused in the doorway, delivering his parting shot without even bothering to look at me. "You should be grateful I'm giving you anything at all. Be smart for once in your life." And then he was gone. The front door clicked shut, and the house fell into a profound silence. But it was not the peaceful silence of my archives. It was the charged electric silence of a battlefield moments after the first shot has been fired. Grateful. Disappear quietly. Be smart. His words echoed in the empty room. He thought he was giving me a warning. In reality, he had just given me my mission parameters. The patience I had cultivated over a lifetime, the discipline honed by years of service, the mind he had dismissed as useless, it all coalesced into a single, sharp point of focus. The archivist was gone. Colonel Vance had just assumed command. The silence Marcus left behind was not an absence of sound. It was an opportunity, a clean operational environment. My first instinct was not to call a lawyer. A lawyer would fight on the battlefield. Marcus had chosen a world of civil litigation and financial negotiations. That was his territory. To bring in a civilian attorney at this stage would be like sending a diplomat to a firefight. No, my training dictated a different protocol. First, you gather intelligence. You understand the enemy's position, his resources, his vulnerabilities. You never engage until you control the terrain. My study, the room he dismissed as a dusty hobby space, became my secure operating environment. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat down at my desk. The glow of the monitor painted the room in a cool, analytical blue. I bypassed our personal finance apps, the ones with the polished, user-friendly interfaces. Instead, I logged directly into the bank's secure server, accessing the raw data feeds of our joint accounts going back 5 years. I began a systematic review of our shared financial history, line by line, transaction by transition. It was a digital excavation. For hours, the landscape was depressingly predictable. Lavish dinners, 5-star hotels, exorbitant fees at his golf club, designer clothes. It was a clear portrait of a man obsessed with the performance of wealth. I felt nothing looking at it. It was just data, a baseline of behavior. And in my line of work, the first step is always to establish the baseline so you can spot the deviation. It was almost 3 a.m. when I found it. A thread, small, almost insignificant, tucked away in a dense thicket of other expenses. A wire transfer for $9,500. It was not the amount that caught my eye. He spent that much on watches. It was the destination, MGX Holdings, LLC. I had never heard of it. It was not a luxury brand, not a resort, not an investment firm he had ever mentioned. I ran the name through a series of proprietary search databases. Nothing. No corporate website, no public records beyond a basic registration in Delaware, the go-to state for anonymous shell corporations. It was a ghost name with no digital footprint. To Marcus, it was a rounding error, a drop in the ocean of his vast expenditures. To me, it was a signal in the noise. It was the first loose thread on a very expensive suit. And I knew, with the cold certainty of a seasoned analyst, that if I pulled it, the entire fabrication would unravel. MGX Holdings was a dead end. But in intelligence work, a dead end, and the dead end is never the end of the line. It is a signpost, a deliberate obstruction designed to make you turn back. My training was to push through it. The name itself was a piece of misdirection. The real information lay in the transaction data, the digital breadcrumbs it left behind. Over the next few nights, after Marcus was asleep, my study transformed. The room he saw as a quaint library became a strategic operations center. I printed out geological survey maps of the entire county documents I had access to through the university's extensive digital archives. I cross-referenced these with public land registry records and LLC registration databases. The floor of my study, the plush Persian rug he had bought as a showpiece, was soon covered in a complex mosaic of paper. It looked like chaos. To me, it was a battlefield taking shape. I treated MGX Holdings not as a company, but as an unknown hostile entity. I began to map its movements. Following the initial wire transfer, I found other smaller payments, all routed through a series of interlocking shell corporations, each one a different name registered in a different state. It was a classic money laundering technique designed to muddy the waters and make the original source of the funds untraceable. Marcus was arrogant, but he was not stupid. He had built a fortress around his secrets. But a fortress is only as strong as its foundation. And his foundation was greed. He was not just hiding money. He was moving it for a purpose. My breakthrough came when I stopped thinking about the money and started thinking about the land. I began plotting the locations of small, seemingly insignificant parcels of real estate that had been purchased by these ghost companies over the last 18 months. A disused warehouse here, an abandoned farm plot there, a stretch of undeveloped woodland. Individually, they were worthless, forgotten scraps of the county. But when I laid the plot points over the large geological survey map on my floor, a pattern emerged. It was faint, at first like a constellation, slowly revealing itself in the twilight. But it was there. The seemingly random parcels of land were not random at all. They formed a perfect unbroken perimeter, a border. And that border encircled one of the most strategically sensitive pieces of real estate in the entire state, the undeveloped southern quadrant of the Fort Gilmore military base. My breath caught in my throat. I stood up and looked down at the map, at the web of deceit I had uncovered. The shell companies, the laundered money, the carefully acquired land. It all clicked into place with the cold, terrifying clarity of a classified intelligence briefing. This was not just a man hiding money from his wife in a divorce. This was bigger. This was a sophisticated long-term plan to acquire and control the land adjacent to a critical piece of national security infrastructure. And Marcus, my husband, the man who called me useless, was right at the center of the web. He thought he was playing a game of financial chess against me. He had no idea he was actually operating on a battlefield I knew better than he could ever imagine. The discovery of the Fort Gilmore perimeter sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the late hour. This was no longer a domestic dispute. This was a potential threat to national security. My entire perspective shifted. The meticulous work of the past few nights, initially driven by a need for self-preservation in a divorce, was now reframed by a much older, deeper instinct: duty. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of intense, unbroken focus. Sleep became a luxury I could not afford. I cross-referenced the land purchases with encrypted databases I still had access to from my former life, using backdoors and security protocols that had been ingrained in me for decades. I was not just looking at land deeds anymore. I was searching for foreign interests, political connections, and patterns of investment that signaled something more sinister than simple corporate greed. The picture that emerged was chilling. The money Marcus was laundering did not originate from his real estate deals. It was flowing in from an offshore investment fund with known ties to foreign adversaries' nations that had a vested interest in having intelligence assets positioned near a facility like Fort Gilmore. Fort Gilmore was not just any military base. It was home to a major drone surveillance and command center, one of the nerve centers of our overseas operations. My blood ran cold. He was not just a greedy, cheating husband. He was a willing participant, or at the very least, a criminally negligent pawn in an operation aimed at undermining the security of the country I had sworn an oath to protect. His arrogance, his desperate need to feel powerful and important, had made him the perfect target for recruitment. They had flattered his ego, filled his pockets, and he had eagerly sold them a foothold right at our back door. And then I found the final piece of the puzzle, the big one, the keystone that held the entire corrupt arch together. A single massive transaction hidden inside the convoluted paperwork of one of the shell companies. A payment of $850,000. This was the seed money, the capital injection that had funded the entire land acquisition scheme. $850,000. The number seemed to burn on the screen. It was an obscene amount of money, a sum that represented a level of betrayal I could barely comprehend. He had not just lied to me about his finances. He had used our shared life, our joint accounts, the very foundation of our marriage, as a cover to finance an act of treason. I leaned back in my chair, the exhaustion of the past few days hitting me all at once. The emotional pain of his personal betrayal was now dwarfed by the cold, hard reality of his crimes. He had dismissed me as a useless archivist, a woman who played with old papers. But it was those old papers, that old training, that had allowed me to uncover a truth far darker than simple infidelity. The stakes had just been raised exponentially. This was no longer about winning a divorce settlement. It was about neutralizing a threat. There is a moment in every intelligence operation when the phase of passive collection ends and the phase of active engagement begins. It is a point of no return. Once you make the call, once you transmit the data, you are no longer an observer. You are an active participant in the events that follow. For me, that moment arrived just before dawn on a cold Friday morning. The report was finished. It was a concise 20-page document detailing every aspect of my investigation, every shell company, every transaction, every land purchase, every link to the foreign investment fund. I had stripped it of all personal emotion. It was not a story of a wife betrayed. It was a clinical, factual threat assessment, complete with appendices, data charts, and source verifications. It was the kind of report I had written 100 times before a document designed to be irrefutable. But how to transmit it? I could not simply walk into an FBI field office. The story was too incredible, and Marcus was a respected local businessman. They would see me as a scorned wife seeking revenge, and the investigation could get buried in bureaucratic red tape for months. By then, Marcus could liquidate his assets and disappear. No, I needed to get this information directly into the right hands to someone who would understand the strategic implications immediately, someone who operated at a level where a single command could set the wheels of justice in motion. I went to my desk and unlocked a small secure drawer. Inside was a satellite phone. It was an old piece of gear from my final deployment, a personal item I was technically supposed to have returned, but had kept for sentimental reasons. An emergency lifeline to a world I had left behind. I had never used it since my retirement, until now. I took it out to the backyard, the cold morning air sharp against my skin. The sky was beginning to bruise with the first hints of sunrise. I powered on the device, its encrypted systems whirring to life. I did not have to look up the number. It was committed to memory, a string of digits burned into my brain like a serial number. The phone rang only twice before a familiar voice, gravelly with sleep, answered with a single clipped word: Hayes. General Robert Hayes, my former commanding officer, a man whose strategic mind was second only to his unwavering integrity. We had not spoken in 5 years. Sir, I said, my own voice, sounding strange to my ears. It is Vance. There was a pause on the other end of the line, then the sound of movement of a man sitting up straighter. Eleanor, is everything all right? Everything is fine, sir. But I have a situation here, a matter of national security. The sleepiness was instantly gone from his voice, replaced by the focused authority I remembered so well. Talk to me. I did not give him the full story. Not over an open line, even an encrypted one. I gave him the essentials. The target, the location, the nature of the threat. I kept it brief, professional. When I was done, there was a long silence. I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind, processing the information, assessing the threat level. I have a full report ready for transmission, I finished. Send it, he said, his voice grim. Use the old protocols. I will be waiting. He paused for a second. It is good to hear your voice, Colonel. Welcome back to the fight. The line went dead. I stood in the quiet backyard as the sun began to rise, the satellite phone feeling heavy in my hand. The fight. I had not realized until that moment just how much I had missed it. After sending the encrypted report to General Hayes, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The intelligence was in friendly hands. The operational phase had begun. Now, all that was left was for the enemy to make his final predictable move. My role shifted from active intelligence gathering to passive observation, a quiet waiting game. I went back to my life, to the archives, to the silent house. I became the unassuming wife once more, a ghost in my own home, my face a perfect mask of placid neutrality. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed to swell with an insufferable confidence. With the divorce proceedings officially filed, he saw the finish line. He acted as if he had already won, strutting around the house with the arrogant swagger of a conqueror. He mistook my silence for submission, my composure for defeat. It was a classic intelligence failure on his part. He saw only what his ego allowed him to see. The call came a week before the initial court date. I was in the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner I knew I would be eating alone. My phone buzzed on the counter, Marcus's name flashing on the screen. It was the first time he had called me in weeks. I let it ring 3 times before answering, my voice deliberately flat and weary. "Hello, Marcus." "Eleanor," he said, his voice oozing a triumphant, syrupy charm that turned my stomach. "Just wanted to give you a little heads up, a courtesy, you know." I said nothing, letting the silence press him. "I was at the club today," he continued, "and I ran into an old friend, a very powerful friend, General Robert Hayes. Maybe you have heard of him, big real estate guy now, but he is a 4-star general, a real pillar of the community." My heart gave a single hard thump against my ribs, but my voice remained steady. "I am not sure what that has to do with me, Marcus." "Well, that is the best part," he chuckled, the sound slick with self-satisfaction. We got to talking, and I told him a little bit about our unfortunate situation. He was very sympathetic, so sympathetic, in fact, that he has agreed to show up at our hearing. He is going to be a character witness for me. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it was almost breathtaking. He had walked right into it. He had taken the bait so completely, so perfectly, that it was almost poetic. "He thinks it is a damn shame how you are trying to take me to the cleaners after all I have done for you, Marcus," went on, his voice filled with glee. "So, I just wanted to let you know. When you and your little bargain bin lawyer see a 4-star general sitting on my side of the courtroom, I want you to remember that I gave you the chance to walk away quietly." The bait had not just been taken. It had been swallowed whole, hook, line, and sinker. He thought he was delivering a crushing blow, a final checkmate. He was actually proudly announcing the details of his own execution. "Is that all, Marcus?" I asked, my voice a perfect imitation of defeated resignation. "Yes, that is all." He sounded disappointed. I had not given him more of a reaction. "See you in court, Eleanor." The line went dead. I stood in the quiet kitchen, the phone in my hand. The trap was not just set. The prey had just offered to spring it himself. The days leading up to the court hearing were quiet. A strange, heavy stillness settled over the house, the kind of silence that precedes a thunderstorm. Marcus was rarely home, busy with what he called final preparations, which I knew meant meetings with his lawyers and lunches with his business associates, polishing the narrative of his own victimhood. I did not mind the solitude. It gave me time to prepare in my own way. My preparation did not involve lawyers or legal documents. I had hired a competent, if unassuming, attorney to handle the civil proceedings, a man who knew only the surface details of our divorce. He was a piece on the board necessary for appearances, but he was not my weapon. My real preparation was internal. It was a process of hardening myself, of shedding the last vestiges of Eleanor the wife and fully inhabiting the mind of Colonel Vance. On the final night, I did not try to sleep. Instead, I went to my study. I did not need to review my findings. The data was already etched into my memory. This was a different kind of ritual. I made myself a cup of strong black tea, the way I used to on long nights in secure locations overseas, and I sat down at my desk. From a locked drawer, I took out a single thin folder. It contained my original report, the one I had sent to General Hayes. I read it over one last time, not to check for errors, but to remind myself of the cold, hard facts of the case, to disconnect my own personal history from the professional assessment of the threat. The woman who had been hurt and humiliated was not the person who would be entering that courtroom. The person who would be there was an intelligence officer who had identified a threat and set a strategic countermeasure in motion. I remembered my oath, the words I had spoken as a young cadet, promising to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. For years, I had thought that oath applied only to foreign battlefields. I had never imagined it would apply to my own living room, to the man who slept in my bed. Marcus was not just an unfaithful husband. He was a domestic threat, a vulnerability in the nation's security, and I had a duty to act. When I finished reading, I closed the folder. The plan was in motion. The assets were in place. The enemy was confident, arrogant, and walking blindly into a kill zone of his own making. There was nothing left to do but wait for dawn. I did not feel anger. I did not feel sadness. What I felt was a profound, almost serene sense of clarity. For 20 years, I had lived a life of quiet compromise, slowly allowing my own identity to be eroded by Marcus's relentless contempt. But in his final, arrogant act of betrayal, he had given me an unexpected gift. He had reminded me who I really was. I was not the useless, dusty archivist he saw. I was a guardian, a strategist, and my war was about to begin. The courtroom was exactly as I had pictured it. High ceilings, dark wood paneling, and an air of solemn importance that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. It was a theater designed to intimidate, to make ordinary people feel small and insignificant. Dust motes danced in the long shafts of morning light, slanting through the tall arched windows. The air smelled of old paper floor polish and a faint metallic scent of anxiety. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside my lawyer, Mr. Davies. He was a kind, slightly overwhelmed man in his late 50s, his desk piled with the standard financial disclosures of a contentious divorce. He kept glancing at me, a worried frown creasing his forehead. He thought we were outgunned, and by all conventional measures, he was right. Then Marcus arrived. He did not just walk in. He made an entrance. He was flanked by two expensive-looking lawyers in tailored suits, their leather briefcases gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Marcus himself was the picture of confident success, his suit perfectly pressed, his silver hair impeccably styled. He nodded at acquaintances in the gallery, a small, magnanimous smile on his face, the benevolent king arriving to dispense judgment. He took his seat in the defendant's table directly across from me. For a moment, his eyes met mine. There was no anger in his gaze, no sadness, only a cold, pitying contempt. It was the look of a man swatting away a fly. He held my gaze for a second before turning to confer with his legal team, dismissing me as completely as he had for the past 20 years. He did not see an opponent. He saw a nuisance, a final piece of unpleasant business to be concluded. The room buzzed with quiet conversation until the bailiff's voice cut through the air. "All rise." We stood as the judge entered, a stern-looking woman with intelligent eyes who commanded the room's attention without saying a word. The preliminaries began a drone of legalese and procedural jargon. I barely heard it. My focus was absolute, my senses heightened. I was not listening to the words. I was scanning the room, assessing the layout, noting the exits, observing the personnel. The muscle memory of 1,000 threat assessments kicked in. I noted the two quiet, athletic men in plain suits sitting in the back row. They were not lawyers. They were not press. They were professionals. Hayes's men. My assets were in position. The judge directed her attention to Marcus's lead attorney. The lawyer, a slick, silver-tongued man named Peterson, rose to his feet. His opening statement was a masterpiece of character assassination, painting Marcus as a pillar of the community, a generous provider who had been taken advantage of by a resentful, unambitious wife. I felt Mr. Davies shift uncomfortably beside me. He was preparing for a defensive battle. He had no idea I had already planned the invasion. After his lawyer's polished performance, the judge called Marcus to the stand. He walked with a confident, almost theatrical stride, as if approaching a podium to accept an award. He was sworn in his hand on the Bible, his face a mask of solemn sincerity. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times in private, now flawlessly executed for a public audience. His lawyer, Peterson, began with a series of gentle leading questions designed to build a narrative of Marcus as a long-suffering, magnanimous husband. He spoke of his hard work, his ambition, the empire he had built from nothing. He painted a picture of a man who had generously shared the fruits of his labor with a wife who offered little in return. Then Peterson's tone shifted, becoming more serious, more probing. "Mr. Thompson, could you describe for the court the nature of your wife's contributions to your shared life outside of basic household management?" Marcus sighed a heavy theatrical sound of profound disappointment. He looked at me, his eyes full of feigned sadness. "I tried for years," he said, his voice laced with sorrow. "I encouraged her to find a passion, to build a career, to be a partner to me. But she was content with her hobbies, her books, her little job at the university. There was no ambition, no drive." Peterson nodded grimly. "So, when it came to the complex financial and strategic decisions that built your wealth, is it fair to say Mrs. Vance was not involved?" Marcus gave a short, sad laugh. "Involved, Your Honor. With all due respect, my wife does not have the capacity to understand the kind of deals I was making. I handled everything, the investments, the properties, the entire financial strategy. It was a burden I carried alone because she was simply not equipped to contribute." The air in my lungs felt thin, cold. He was not just lying. He was methodically, expertly constructing the legal foundation for my erasure. Each word was a carefully placed stone in the wall he was building around my life, sealing me inside the label he had created for me. Then came the final brutal stroke. Peterson leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential, almost sympathetic tone. "So, in the end, Mr. Thompson, after 20 years of marriage, how would you characterize your wife's role in your success?" Marcus paused, letting the silence hang in the air for maximum dramatic effect. He looked directly at the judge, then his gaze shifted and landed on me, a laser beam of pure, unadulterated contempt. He leaned into the microphone. "Useless," he said. The word was not shouted. It was spoken with a quiet, devastating finality. He said it as if it were an undeniable fact, a clinical diagnosis. "Your Honor, she was a financial and intellectual liability, a weight I had to carry. In the story of my life, my wife was for all intents and purposes useless." The word hit the air and seemed to hang there, vibrating with malice. I felt the eyes of everyone in the room turn to me, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. I felt my own lawyer flinch beside me. But I did not look down. I did not cry. I held Marcus's gaze, my expression unreadable. Inside, a final door clicked shut. The last ember of any shared history between us was extinguished. The battlefield was now clear. The word useless echoed in the profound silence that followed. Marcus remained on the stand, his expression one of grim satisfaction. He had delivered his killing blow, and now he was waiting for the applause. His lawyer, Peterson, looked like a cat that had cornered a canary, a smug little smile playing on his lips. He let the moment linger before turning to the judge. "Your Honor, the defense rests its primary testimony. However, we would like to call one final character witness to corroborate Mr. Thompson's standing in the community. A man whose integrity is beyond reproach. The defense calls General Robert Hayes." A ripple of murmurs went through the gallery. The name was well known. A 4-star general. A local legend. Marcus straightened his tie, a look of pure triumph spreading across his face. He shot me a quick, gloating glance. This was his checkmate. the final undeniable proof of his superiority. He was bringing in a cannon to shoot a fly. The bailiff called the name, and the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. General Hayes entered. He was exactly as I remembered him, tall and imposing, his posture ramrod straight, even in a civilian suit. His presence seemed to shrink the already large room. He walked with a calm, deliberate authority that commanded immediate respect. Marcus puffed out his chest, a proud little smile on his face as he prepared to be vindicated by his powerful friend. Peterson stepped forward, ready to guide the general to the witness stand. But the general did not look at Peterson. He did not look at the judge. His eyes, sharp and analytical, scanned the room before they found me. And they stopped. The polite public mask he had been wearing vanished. His expression shifted instantly, his back somehow becoming even straighter. The easygoing businessman disappeared, and the commanding officer took his place. A flicker of recognition of surprise, and then of profound military seriousness crossed his face. He ignored the lawyer's outstretched hand. He ignored the witness stand completely. He changed his course, and with the same purposeful strides he would use on a military parade ground, he walked directly toward the plaintiff's table. He walked directly toward me. The courtroom fell into a confused, dead silence. My own lawyer, Mr. Davies, looked utterly bewildered. Marcus's triumphant smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. What was happening? This was not part of the script. General Hayes stopped directly in front of me. For a moment, we just looked at each other. 20 years of a quiet civilian life seemed to melt away. He saw me, and I knew that he saw me, not as the woman Marcus had described, but as the officer he had once commanded. Then in the stunned silence of the courtroom, General Robert Hayes, a man respected and feared throughout the highest echelons of power, brought his heels together with a sharp, audible click. He raised his right hand to his brow in a crisp, perfect military salute. His voice, trained to carry across battlefields, rang out clear and unwavering, filling every corner of the room. "Colonel Vance," he said, "it is an honor." The general's words, Colonel Vance, seemed to shatter the very air in the courtroom. The silence that followed was not empty. It was a vacuum pulling in all the shock, confusion, and disbelief in the room. I could feel the blood drain from Marcus's face without even looking at him. His entire carefully constructed narrative had just been obliterated by 2 words and a gesture. The judge, a woman clearly not easily rattled, was the first to find her voice. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowed, peering down from the bench. "General Hayes," she said, her tone sharp with authority, "can you please explain the meaning of this? You were called as a character witness for Mr. Thompson." General Hayes lowered his salute but remained standing at attention before me. He turned his head just enough to address the judge, his voice cold and precise. "That is what Mr. Thompson was led to believe, Your Honor. In truth, my presence here today is required by a federal court subpoena issued in response to a priority threat assessment my office received 72 hours ago." A low gasp rippled through the gallery. Marcus's lawyer, Peterson, shot to his feet, his face a mask of outrage and confusion. "Objection, Your Honor. This is procedural sabotage." "Overruled." The judge snapped, her eyes fixed on General Hayes. "Continue, General." Hayes gave a curt nod. He gestured toward his aide, who had been sitting quietly in the gallery. The aide stood, walked forward, and handed a thick, bound document with a classified cover sheet to the bailiff, who in turn presented it to the judge. "That document, Your Honor, is a preliminary intelligence report," Hayes explained, his voice echoing in the tense silence. "It details a sophisticated criminal conspiracy involving money laundering, wire fraud, and a conspiracy to acquire sensitive real estate adjacent to a secure military installation, namely Fort Gilmore." The judge's eyes widened slightly as she scanned the first page. She looked up, her gaze sweeping from the report to Marcus, who now looked physically ill. His face was pale, sweaty, his confident facade completely gone, replaced by the terrified look of a trapped animal. And the primary subject of this investigation, Hayes continued it, his voice dropping like a hammer blow, is the man sitting at the defendant's table, Mr. Marcus Thompson. Marcus made a choking sound, half protest, half sob. This is insane. It is a lie. Where did you get this? This fantasy. Who could possibly have put this together? His frantic, terrified eyes darted around the room, searching for an explanation, for a source of this sudden, catastrophic reversal of fortune. He looked at his lawyers, at the judge, at the stunned faces in the gallery. And then finally, his gaze fell on me, on the quiet, useless wife he had just publicly disowned. And in that moment, in the chilling calm of my unblinking stare, he finally understood. The moment Marcus's terrified eyes locked onto mine, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for everyone in the room. The air crackled with the sudden, shocking realization. It was me, the quiet wife, the dusty archivist, the useless woman. I was the source. General Hayes, seeing the understanding dawn on Marcus's face, did not spare him. He turned slightly, his gaze resting on me, but his voice was pitched for the entire court to hear for the official record. Your Honor, he said, for the past several years, my office has been monitoring suspicious financial activities surrounding several key military installations. We had fragments of data, whispers of a threat, but we lacked a cohesive picture. We lacked the one analyst who could see the pattern in the noise. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Marcus was shaking his head now, a low, guttural sound of denial caught in his throat. No, it is not possible. The analyst, who finally connected all the dots, Hayes continued, his voice resonating with deep professional respect, the strategist who identified the network of shell corporations, who traced the laundered funds back to their foreign source, and who authored the comprehensive threat assessment you now hold in your hands, is one of the finest intelligence officers I have ever had the privilege of serving with. He then turned his body fully facing me across the stunned silence of the courtroom. His voice was filled with an authority that left no room for doubt, a final public validation that echoed off the cold wood walls. That analyst is Colonel Eleanor Vance. The name, my true name, my rank landed with the force of a verdict. It was the ultimate refutation of everything Marcus had just claimed. The final, irrefutable proof that the woman he called useless was in fact a master of a world he could not even begin to comprehend. At a subtle nod from General Hayes, the two quiet men in suits who had been sitting in the back row stood up. They walked forward with a calm, unnerving purpose. One of them approached Marcus's table and held up a badge. FBI. Marcus Thompson, the agent said, his voice calm and official. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Marcus finally broke. A wild, desperate rage contorted his features. This is her, he screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. She did this. She set me up. The lead agent did not even glance at me. He simply took Marcus's arm. You have the right to remain silent, he began, the words of the Miranda, warning a grim counterpoint to Marcus's frantic protests. As they pulled him to his feet, cuffing his hands behind his back, Marcus's eyes found mine one last time. They were filled with a toxic mixture of hatred, disbelief, and for the first time in 20 years, a sliver of genuine, unadulterated fear. He had not just been outmaneuvered, he had been intellectually annihilated. And the architect of his destruction was the one person in the world he had never, ever seen as a threat. The courtroom slowly emptied, the buzz of shocked whispers and shuffling feet fading away until only a profound quiet remained. Marcus was gone, led away by the federal agents. His expensive lawyers stood clustered together, their confident facades shattered now, looking like disorganized soldiers on a lost battlefield. The judge had adjourned the divorce proceedings indefinitely pending the outcome of the federal criminal investigation. For all intents and purposes, my war was over. I remained seated at the plaintiff's table for a long time, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly draining away, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. "Mr. Davies!" My lawyer sat beside me, looking at me with a mixture of awe and utter bewilderment, as if seeing a stranger for the first time. He cleared his throat a few times, opened his mouth to speak, then seemed to think better of it, and simply shook his head in silence. General Hayes approached my table, his footsteps echoing softly in the now empty room. The stern commander was gone, replaced by the old friend and mentor I remembered. He pulled up a chair and sat down, not as a general addressing a colonel, but as one veteran to another. "That was a clean operation, Eleanor," he said, his voice low and laced with a quiet pride. "You never lost your touch." I managed a small, tired smile. "I just followed the data, sir." He nodded, understanding everything I was not saying. "I am sorry it came to this. Sorry that you were the one who had to find it." I looked around the empty courtroom at the polished wood and the imposing judge's bench. This was not the battlefield I had trained for, but the principles were the same. A threat is a threat. It does not matter if it is in a foreign desert or in your own home. You identify it, you assess it, and you neutralize it. "Thank you for answering the call, Robert," I said, using his first name for the first time in years. He gave me a sad, knowing smile. "Always, Colonel, always." We sat in comfortable silence for another minute before he stood up. "The wheels are in motion," he said. "The FBI will handle the rest. They will likely need a formal statement from you. But my office will run interference, make sure they treat you with the respect you are owed. Take some time for yourself, Eleanor. You have earned it." With a final respectful nod, he turned and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Later that afternoon, I returned to the house. The large, opulent home that had felt like a gilded cage for so many years now felt just empty. And the emptiness was not sad. It was peaceful. It was clean. The oppressive weight of Marcus's ego, his ambition, his constant subtle dismissals was gone. The air itself felt lighter, easier to breathe. I walked into my study, the room where the counter-operation had been planned and executed. The maps were gone, the documents filed away. It was just a quiet room with books again. I went to the window and looked out at the city below. For the first time in 2 decades, I was not just looking at a view. I was looking at a future that was entirely my own, a blank map waiting for me to draw the borders. I did not know where it would lead, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was no longer on the defensive. Several weeks passed. The sensational story of the courtroom drama faded from the local news, replaced by other headlines, other dramas. The legal machinery ground on in the background, but for me, the world had become quiet again. Marcus, facing overwhelming evidence and the full weight of the federal government, had taken a plea deal. He would spend a significant number of years in a place where his ambition and arrogance would be nothing more than liabilities. The divorce was finalized in a sterile, brief hearing. The house, the assets, they were all sorted out by the courts. They were just details, the logistical aftermath of a war that had already been won. One crisp autumn morning, a package arrived. It was a simple manila envelope with the official seal of the Department of Defense. Inside, there was no letter, no explanation, just a single large rolled-up map. I carefully unrolled it on my desk. It was not a historical document. It was a modern, highly detailed satellite map of a volatile region in Eastern Europe, an area where geopolitical tensions were simmering. My phone rang a moment later. It was General Hayes. "Did you get it?" he asked, his voice warm and familiar. "It is on my desk right now," I replied, my fingers tracing the complex topography. "The situation over there is complicated," he said, a master of military understatement. "Our current analysts are seeing the trees, but I am not sure anyone is seeing the forest. We need a strategist, someone who can look at that map and see not just what is there, but what is coming next. I listened, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. "This is not an order, Colonel," he continued softly, "and it is not a favor. It is a request. Your country needs your mind again, Eleanor. If you are interested." I looked down at the map. It was a puzzle, a complex web of political, military, and economic data waiting to be untangled. It was a challenge. For 20 years, I had preserved the stories of old battles. Now, I was being asked to help shape the outcome of new ones. My retirement had been a long, quiet ceasefire. But the truth was, a mind trained for strategy never really rests. It just waits for a new mission. I thought of Marcus's final sneering words in the kitchen. Useless. Disappear quietly. Be smart. I had been smart. I had refused to disappear. And I had proven, in the most definitive way possible, that I was the furthest thing from useless. My past was not a dusty collection of memories to be archived. It was a weapon, an asset, a toolset that I had just used to reclaim my own life. And now it was a toolset I could use to serve a purpose larger than myself once more. "I am listening," I said into the phone, my voice clear and steady. "Tell me about the mission." A new map was spread out before me. Not a map of a broken past, but a map of a purposeful future. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Thank you for joining me on Eleanor's journey. Her story is a powerful reminder that the quietest people in the room are often the most formidable. It teaches us that true strength is not about being the loudest voice, but about knowing the value of your own mind, even when others try to dismiss it. Sometimes, the greatest victories are won not with a shout, but with a well-executed plan. If this story resonated with you, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What part of Eleanor's victory felt the most satisfying to you? Your engagement helps our community grow. And if you have not already, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next story of justice served. Until next time, remember your own strength.